Welcome to Positive Perspectives on Accounting, the virtual seminar series that explores the enabling aspects of accounting in society.
In this episode, we will talk to Elise Berlinski, who is an accounting researcher interested in artificial intelligence, platform organizations, and algorithms. Elise also has a fascinating profile because in addition to her PhD in accounting, she's a trained data scientist with a background in physics, mathematics, and engineering. So in this episode, together with Elise, we'll explore the implications of artificial intelligence and algorithms for accounting research and education, and maybe even answer the question whether algorithm is a dancer. Let's get into this episode.
So Elise, thank you for taking the time to talk to us in this new episode on Positive Perspectives on Accounting. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about algorithms, about AI, platform organizations. But before we get to that, would you mind briefly introducing yourself to the audience?
Yes. Hi, Roel, and thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Elise Berlinski. I'm a postdoc at Copenhagen Business School, where I started in October 2021. So I would say that generally I have two main streams of research. One that focuses on the calculative practices within platform organizations, and another one that focuses on how AI algorithms may support decision-making in more traditional organizations. So just to give you maybe a little bit of a background about me. So I did my PhD thesis at ESCP Business School, where I worked on the imaginaries around artificial intelligence and how they participated in structuring their diffusion and the practices of AI. So originally, I'm actually a trained engineer in applied mathematics and computer science. After I did a preparatory class in fundamental mathematics. So after my engineering school, I did two research internships, one in bioinformatics and another one in theoretical machine learning at Imperial College. And then I worked in industry as a data scientist during around 4 years in several fields. There was sports betting, so I created models for football betting. I worked on also actually the auditing of financial models of valuation and pricing of structured credit products. And then I worked a little bit in cybersecurity, HR. Yeah.
Wow, that is incredibly impressive, Elise. That's a lot. Wow. Hey, so you mentioned that your background is in physics, mathematics, data science, engineering, and loads of other things. How did you end up in accounting?
Yeah, I guess it's a question that I often get. So I would say that so basically after my preparatory class, so where I studied theoretical mathematics and physics, so I integrated this engineering school, and I actually specialized in the study of the production of numerical tools for decision making. So, I was already orienting myself towards like the production, so doing operations research, optimization, statistical analysis to be able to produce tools to assist decision making. And so at this time, I actually believed that I would do operations research in a company that, they would like really need this and that it would be my path, But yeah, and at this time, I only had one class of machine learning that I found awkward actually, because I didn't really get it. It was a form of, mix in between optimization and statistics. I didn't really get the point of it. But later, I also did my master's research internship in machine learning. And then when I arrived in the job market, I realized that the demand was for machine learning and not operations research, not as widely at least, So, okay, now I had done some machine learning. So I went to a company and I did this, but I also realized that there was so much enthusiasm. People were saying, "Oh yes, data." So it was in 2013, and were saying, "Oh yes, data scientist, it's the sexiest job of the 21st century." And people seemed to think that it was going to change everything. And my dad even offered me a crystal ball, a little bit as a joke because of all this enthusiasm. And I started wondering, but what is all this fuss about? After all, what are these numbers doing? What is new with these numbers compared to what we had before? Why machine learning and why not statistics or operations research, and why all this? And yes, as I was wondering about this, and I was also thinking that maybe I wanted to move more on the human science side, So yes, these questions emerged. My interest for human sciences and the possibility to do a PhD also emerged. And I found out about the field of management control and accounting. And I think that these questions about what are these numbers doing to people and to organizations? What is new with these numbers? Are questions that are at the heart of this discipline, accounting and management control. And then I met my PhD director, Philippe Zarlowski, who also thought that, we could actually do something together, and really supported me. And and so that's how I ended up in the field of accounting and management control.
Wow, that's an awesome story. Thanks for sharing that with us. It's interesting because what you see nowadays is that a lot of accountants and accounting researchers are being driven into the area of data science and algorithms and machine learning. For you, it's almost the opposite, that you came from that side and then move into accounting. So it's great to see the opposite effects also happening. And because of your very rich background into AI and machine learning, do you think that affects or has affected your view and understanding of how accounting works within organizations?
Yeah, I guess that in any case, in our research field, there are, I would say, a multiplicity of approaches to accounting and of interest in the accounting, practice. And I guess that we also have different perception of what it is somehow. So it's true that probably I tend not to approach accounting by the profession, but rather by the quantification instruments that support, financial logic somehow, or a control logic, So I think that's probably something that is very specific to my background, is that I never approach accounting by the profession. But I guess that in any case, already in the 2000s, with the development of online platforms based on ratings and rankings, this extended the audit society. It modified the practices of transparency and accountability production. And so there was already this form of extension of accounting. And more recently, with the accumulation of big data from always more heterogeneous sources, so not anymore from the traditional ERPs and things like this, and the use of more complex algorithms to analyze this data. This has already attracted the attention of accounting scholars towards the ideas, questions of surveillance capitalism. And they modify organizational boundaries because they include external data. They produce hybridization of the functions. And I would say that if I can cite Power, his recent article in Organization Theory of 2022, that these new data architectures, as he puts it in his article, are displacing the century-long cultural position and authority of the accountant as the arbiter of value. So concepts of transparency and accountability grounded in reciprocity and contractualism are no longer adequate to capture what is at stake in the continuous granular extraction, tracing, and tracking of things and their performance. So end of quotation. So, if the accountants are not anymore the arbiters of value, I guess that maybe approaching, accounting not necessarily from the profession, but rather from the instrument may actually make sense. And, it may be complementary with other approaches, I hope. So yes, and then just to finish about this question, I would say that in any case there are commonalities and of course differences across the various professions of quantifications. And I also think that when there is a new profession of quantification that emerges, such as the data scientist one, then it means that there will be new types of legitimate knowledge that will be produced. And so it's also going to change the accounting profession.
I was just wondering, Elise, if someone asks you, what do you do? Or what is your role? What do you say?
So my role, you mean in the accounting field?
Do you see yourself as an accountant, or do you see yourself as a specialist in AI? So if someone would ask you and you have to explain, what do you do? What do you tell them?
But I see myself as a researcher, and I think that I'm particularly interested in, I would say, the sociology of quantification, and with a strong anchorage in interpretive accounting research. So yes, that's what I would say.
You gave us a glimpse in your research interest already a little bit, and your perspective that you're more interested in the instruments, in the tools, rather than the profession as such, the accounting profession as such. I'd like to follow up on that and ask, could you give us some insights into concrete projects that you are involved in at the moment, and also tell us maybe what some of the most intriguing findings from these projects that you would like to share with us?
Yes, of course. So maybe I will talk about two projects, like the most advanced ones, I guess. So there is one, so as you know, that I've been studying Tinder. And I think that this project is a lot about, this question of, once again, as PPoA would put it in this article, cyborgization, and also then there is the question of reconceptualizing spaces when we talk about digital spaces and what it is to act at a distance. This research agenda was opened by, the article of Martin Kornberger, Dane Fugger, and Jan Moritz, and 2017 Evaluative Infrastructures. And so I think that, yes, we are like, so in this article, we are with Jan Moritz following this line of research. So, because there is really this, I think, central idea in accounting, are like all these studies of the mechanisms by which accounting enable to act at a distance. And so, these very central findings that, there are different spaces or regions, there are centers and there are peripheries. And, there is the idea that it is possible to describe on the one hand the centers, on the other hand the peripheries. It is possible to describe the tools available to the center, maybe specific types of costs. And yes, so there are specific flows of power, I would say, from the centers to the peripheries. And so under these conditions, it was possible to describe specific programs that were being applied, based on normative economic theories, etc. I think that online, there is not such a clear separation. What we see online at first sight would be sort of flows of elements that may appear relatively disorganized at first sight. And it's difficult to actually describe a clear program. I mean, of course, we can talk about the intentions of the platform owners, but an intention, it's not directly translated because there is no theory that can tell you, okay, this intention can be precisely translated in these complex interactions. So it's a little bit different what is going on. And I think that once again, so I really like this article of PPoA. So sorry if I keep coming back to it. But I think that there is really this idea of cyborgization where it's not really possible to separate humans and technologies because they are in an interaction and they become an entity in this interaction, a different entity. And so that's why maybe, as he says, critical analysis of subjectivation and internalization may fall short of enlightening the way humans are becoming, if not fully cyborgs, then subject to intense cyborg-like processes via bodily attachment to data architectures. End of quote. So I think that in this article, we are actually trying to understand what is happening here, because there is always this financial logic that is merged into all these flows, because there are commercial platforms trying to make money. So what we do and what our study does, it studies these flows of elements that cross the platform and how users are transformed rather than, I would say, acted upon in the interactions. And so we draw on a conceptual frame anchored in the agencement theory of Deleuze and Guattari. And what we evidence is that the flows can be characterized. They are constituted of various elements linked together. And as we investigate the types of links, so, for example, are the elements linked in categories by algorithms, or are they related in a more fluid way with other types of algorithms that may not necessarily produce categories? As we investigate the types of links, and then we investigate the elements within the relations, because they are transformed in the relations, we can find that these flows produce spaces that are always in the becoming, but still spaces where there are specific mechanisms that are going to act on users, or not act on users, but more where user desire is going to either be enclosed, so they will be territorialized, which is a central concept of accounting, or otherwise their desire may flow and they may continuously invent or experience the world in new ways. And so it's what we try to show, is that there are these spaces that are always, in the becoming. They are not deterministic, but still there is an organization that emerges if we study these flows. So I don't know whether it's clear, but at least it's what we try to do in this article. So yes, and so I guess that this study, it's mainly trying to move a step towards a new characterization of the mechanisms by which platforms economize and organize, because of course we need to admit that in these flows there are a lot of financial questions, because platforms make money through these flows. So and so this was Tinder. Then maybe another one a bit quickly. So there is we studied digital social movements. So I think that there is really the fact that the ubiquity of algorithmic calculative practices that are always merged with the financial logic make accounting research, really relevant to study always more different fields, because now it's very difficult to separate commercial imperatives with, any organization that emerges. And so, in any case, without spending too much time on this idea, so studying an online social movement, and more specifically QAnon, it's an American conspiracy theory. So what we could find is that maybe online we need to sort of reframe framing theory. So sorry, this study was carried with Martin Kornberger and Jan Morrison. So that's the we refers to them as well. So what we found is that maybe online we need to reframe framing theory, because framing is becoming a totally socio-material process. It's not meaning construction cannot be disentangled from all these material aspects of the online space. Yeah. Yes. So I would say that yes, these are two main findings. I'm also working on the data scientist work, but it's really much work in progress. So, yeah.
Very, very interesting. Can I just come back to the first study, and maybe it also relates to the second study, because you mentioned the increased fluidity in platform organizations. Everything is constantly in the making. Spaces are reconceptualized all the time. Actors are transformed, retransformed all the time. If you could reflect a little bit on the implications for the individual manager, for the members of platform organizations, for accountants, if you want. So how does that affect who they are, what they do?
I guess that's something that is really, really different now from, what it was before. I think it's that they always work on latent variables. It's very difficult to work directly. You cannot really maybe make such clear plans, like marketing plans or whatever, and if we look at platforms, what they do, they keep reinventing new metrics to evaluate their performance. For example, if we think of YouTube, it used to be, for example, the number of watches or the number of likes, but now it's going to be the watch time. And they always have to move and find these new latent variables to be able to strategize, to be able to take decisions about how to implement their platforms. I would say this is something that changes.
And that relates also to another term that you already mentioned, and that also comes up in your research, evaluative infrastructures, right? Could you explain to us a little bit what that actually means?
Yeah, so this term was, as already mentioned, actually pinned by Martin Kornberger, David Fluger, and Jan Moritzen in the article of 2017 published in EOS, Evaluative Infrastructures Accounting for Platform Organization. So I think at the time they focused on eBay, and so I would say that they referred to online platforms in the sense of market, where we have a third party, the platform owner, who would facilitate exchanges between the producers who own the assets that are exchanged and the consumers who look for the assets. And of course, the specificity is that the platform owners, they do not have a direct power on they do not have a direct authority, at least, on the producers. Yes, and so they actually developed this concept because what they evidenced was the need to reconceptualize accounting when it moved online. And in particular, that online, this hierarchical understanding of accounting was maybe not appropriate anymore. And so what they wanted, so this hierarchical understanding of accounting was this understanding where there is a center and there are peripheries. And so what they argued was that we needed a more heterarchical understanding of accounting, so that's why they developed this idea of evaluative infrastructure. And so these infrastructures are specific because what they found is that power is centralized, but control are distributed. They are hierarchical. Through an ecology of devices, so these devices enable these continuous evaluations by the users, and so therefore make control distributed, hierarchical. And so then there is this idea that many people become auditors. So this was also discussed in other studies, like the one of Jekyll and Carter in 2011, and also the one of McDade et al. In Triple AG in 2017. So yes. And also something else interesting that they developed in this study, it's the idea that platforms or evaluative infrastructures continuously produce new configuration of the world. So something that we have already discussed. And I think that it's an idea that they open towards this new idea. And so now in our Tinder article, we are trying to sort of develop this idea further and characterize these new configurations. And so then I think that more generally, this concept really evidenced, the role that accounting research has to play in, the conceptualization of platform organization, the relevance of accounting research to, understand these new phenomena. And I think that even though they applied it to specific types of platform at the time, it can be extended to, broader types of platforms, like, social media, where we could argue that it is a third party that enables to match users with content. And the evaluations are maybe, always implicit through likes, through comments, etc. So, yes.
And you mentioned before also that in your one of the projects you look at social movements and a new conception of framing theory. And I was wondering, what you just described, everyone is involved in the constant reconstitution of these organizations. Everyone is an auditor. Everyone is constantly coming up with new metrics, right? How does that then affect also the framing of problems, for example? If everyone is involved in constantly reconstructing organizations, how does that affect the dynamics? Could you reflect a little bit around that?
Yeah, so basically in our study, about QAnon with Martin and Jan, what we argue, it's there is this idea of a framing process that is in several stages. And so we argue, okay, maybe the stages are a bit different. And there is, the first stage where we argue it's a stage of linking. And actually there is a co-production of a narrative. And so to be able to attract, to create a first core group, you need to manage to get online users to co-produce a narrative. But at the same time, you need to be able to act on the space in a way that this narrative is going to be linked, because it's not evident to manage to sort of re-centralize a decentralized narrative, So that's why it's a question of linking. It's a question of giving visibility and then relinking the various elements and then producing a joint narrative. This question actually of this co-production of a narrative in online social movement was already pinned by previous studies with this idea of a connective action. But what they didn't really consider was this question of how do you play on space? How do you shape space to be able to actually co-produce a coherent narrative that enables you to have a core group? Then there is a second stage, looping, where we are more interested in how you have actually an organization that is become structured and then layered, where different meanings become central in different layers, and this is related to the various online spaces. But again, maybe this is a bit less, less close to your question. And I would say the last stage, then labyrinthing, when the social movement would become mainstream, what we show is that actually there is both strategizing from the members of the social movement, but at the same time, the algorithm is also a strategic agent of the platform that aims at retaining people. And so as soon as it's going to notice that people are interested in a subject, it's going to create echo chambers. And so what we find is that there are various local frame extensions where, the social movement has many different subjects, but it's going to spread the various subjects that are somehow, related to a core ID. And then the algorithm is going to find out, oh, this person is more interested in this subject, so I'm going to show this person this subject. And we find a lot of local frame extensions because of algorithmic processes.
Awesome. Elise, I would like to take you back to where we started talking about platform organizations. Now, you've mentioned a range of different types of platform organizations. You mentioned studies on Airbnb. You mentioned Tinder. But what makes a platform organization, and how do they differ from, let's say, traditional organizations?
Yeah. Okay, so as we saw, they are like, we can define them as third parties that are simply going to facilitate exchanges between producers who own the assets that are exchanged and consumers who look for the assets. So they provide an interface and they provide calculative tools that enable or facilitate these exchanges. Of course, there are various types of platforms. So it's something that I would really, really like to stress is that there are very many types of platforms and they do not all have the same effects. They do not have the same business model. And I would say that while some platforms may, participate in extending the world of possibilities. Some of our platforms, we need to admit, work on very exploitative practices, as Kellogg et al. Showed in the article of 2020, in an Academy of Management review. Yes, but so in any case, on some platforms, so to me, the only service really they provide is simply to match buyers and sellers and a specific interface. And actually, they often take advantage of it to avoid having any legal responsibilities, So, and also to avoid to be able to lower costs. So this is something that Kornberger et al. In the article of 2017, Evaluative Infrastructures, show really well, this idea that they have no interest into direct intervention because this would be a cost to them. So this is really new, to avoid intervention, and avoid any legal responsibilities. It's but so I would say that some platforms, they make money thanks to the financial transactions. So, they take some money on every financial transaction, such as like Airbnb, eBay, or things like this. Then they may also make money thanks to advertisements like Facebook, maybe Google, Instagram, or whatever, And then they also may make money thanks to paying subscriptions like Tinder, LinkedIn, things like this. But of course, in almost all cases, they also sell users data. And this is something really new that, we become, the product. We are at the same time the consumer and at the same time the product of these platforms. Yes. And so also what is really new, thanks to these practices, the fact that they only facilitate exchanges, they can have very few employees, even when they are really spread everywhere in the world. Like Airbnb has only 6,000 employees overall. It's nothing. And so this is something. This is something really new, and maybe as just a little bracket, if I may quickly, they also have something that we are not observing now. So it's something new that seems to be emerging. Not really new, but I know they have this tendency of colonization. For example, Amazon, they sort of destroy a lot of local shops, and then they open their own physical shops. So they just actually sort of destroy and replace also just very traditional businesses. So yes, because if we look, Uber is not even making money at the moment. So most of these platforms are not making money, so they need to find a way to make money. Amazon is making money.
And at least to me, what comes to mind then is some questions around accountability, because you mentioned that user data is being sold. Some platform organizations seem to have certain exploitative practices. There's local business being driven out of business. So what are your views with regards to how we can hold such organizations accountable?
I think that what is really complicated, but so this is a bit going out of my mind, like this, is that, of course, a lot of them are situated in the US. At least a lot of them that are influential in Europe are situated in the US. I'm not saying that all big digital companies are in the US, because in China they have also huge digital companies and are very advanced on this as well. But at least about Europeans and maybe Australians, but it's simply, I don't know Australia, so it's more difficult for me to talk, but I would assume that it's probably the same. So I guess that what is difficult is to create laws, and it's what, Shoshana Zuboff, Pasquale, they all argue that it is actually quite difficult, to manage to hold them accountable. So I think that, a choice of Europe was to create the GDPR and, to create local regulations. And I guess that this would be something. But then, the question is always a bit difficult, because there are all these ideas that, maybe they should be better at curating the content. Because, of course, for example, Frances Hogan alerted about the fact that Facebook was taking advantage of extreme content to be able to, trap somehow users to stay longer on the platform, to expose them more to advertisement and all that. But at the same time, if it's there is always this question of do we consider these platforms as a public space, or do we consider these platforms as media? Are they legitimate to decide what should be shown or not? So I don't know, there are complicated regulatory questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great discussion there about the accountability issues within such organizations. Again, on a broader scale, Elise, what is it that we as accounting scholars and perhaps even accounting practitioners, what is it that we can learn from how these organizations operate? Yeah, so I guess that in any case, at least my view would be that, there are a lot of new numbers that are being produced. Accounting, even as a profession, is going to be displaced. Management control, at least, is going to be displaced quite fast. Strategizing as well. We already see that there are more different functions in organization that participate in the production of metrics, and so in some decisions that used to be the decisions of the finance function. So this was Arna Boldi et al. In their 2017 article. So yes, they showed all this, So I think that in any case, we sort of need to theorize these phenomena, not necessarily because at the moment we would have, or at least maybe I don't necessarily have the most practical direct answer, but my answer is more, we're observing a movement, and we see that this movement is not stopping. And as researchers, we want to be ahead and not behind. And as we develop new theories, then, we also are able to shed light ahead of time about what is happening.
We have talked about platform organizations now quite a bit. And I would like to move now to more traditional organizations, if that's okay, because we see the diffusion of algorithms and algorithmic decision making, or at least the idea, to all sorts of organizations. And my question to you would be, what, from your perspective, is the role of algorithms, algorithmic decision making in contemporary organizations that are maybe not necessarily the Tinders and all the other the YouTubes of this world? How are they used, and to what extent is that different from what people have done always with statistics and all sorts of data?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there are several things about values and. So I think that first there is one thing, and this was one thing I was a bit concerned about during my PhD, but maybe, I think that with algorithms in an organization, AI in organization, there have been two very maybe extreme positions. One that would be super enthusiastic, like, the famous saying of Anderson in 2008, like, we don't need theory anymore. It's useless because we have supercomputers that are going to be super performant. Or even, Geoffrey Hinton, he's like Turing Prize, thanks to his deep learning algorithms, who said, we shouldn't train radiologists anymore because it's evident that in 5 years, algorithms will do better than they do. And this was in 2016, and the algorithms are not at all doing better than what the radiologists are doing, So there is this very enthusiastic position, which I think is not very helpful. And then there is the other position that is very, critical, saying that, it's going to kill all our possibilities of learning, that it's going to create only exploitation, etc. And I think that maybe, there was, the Gartner, curve, where there was this big hype with all this enthusiasm that was maybe counterbalanced with a lot of criticism. And now I think we're going down the hype, because people are realizing that it's not going to be the magical tool that will solve everything in organizations, but that maybe it's not going to be the evil either. And so maybe we can do things with this. Then, maybe, if we step back and we actually think about, what these AI algorithms enable to do or not, maybe we can try to start developing new practices. Then about the question, the difference with statistics. So, of course, there is one difference, which is the question of automation. Statistics never aimed at automation, while AI aims at automation a lot, or at least it's used a lot for automation. But this is not really about decision. If we really focus on the question of decision, I would say that, yes, it's different because the modes of reasoning are not the same. And what is perceived to be legitimate and valid knowledge is not the same. So, if, for example, I carry a regression with a statistics mindset. So generally, statistics are based on very explicit hypotheses of regularity. You have distribution laws, and you want to make sure that your variables are sort of, you are looking for their laws. So if I carry a regression with a statistics mindset, quite quickly, what I'm going to do is to check whether my variables can be said to follow a Gaussian or a normal distribution. And like this, based on this, I will be able to, validate my regression based on a lot of statistical metrics. This is what I would do if I was doing statistics. But if I do a regression with the machine learning mindset, I will never check this. The only thing I will do is to check my prediction power. And probably quite soon I'm going to decide not to do a regression anymore, because probably I will find that the prediction power is not as good as with another algorithms. And that's it. That's the only thing I would do. So this is something I think very different, even though you see it's the same tool. And I would say that just to go a little bit further about the difference, for example, there are a few discussions about, the fact that during the 2007 crisis, there were a lot of portfolio of assets that were either priced or valued based on Gaussian or normal distributions. And now there is a debate because there are, some experts are saying actually if they had used a student T distribution with larger tails, maybe the crisis could at least in part have been avoided. But these kind of debates, they would not be possible with machine learning because we do not care about this sort of distribution of the variables. So there are more, I would say, black boxes. So yes, so I think that's the main differences.
You are an expert in data science, in statistics, and you worked as a data scientist also. How was that communicating those things to managers? Did they understand what you were doing?
At least what I can say is that in one company, I really needed to communicate to managers and to not technical persons. And I had a colleague, she was a consultant. She was actually an auditor. Yes, she. So it was in the litigation field. So basically, I was doing the audit of the algorithms in litigation, and because she was an accountant auditor, and so I was the algorithmic auditor, even though there was no certification for this while she was certified. And yes, and it was very great to work with her because we spent hours and hours together where she was telling me, okay, you need to explain to me so I can try to make sense of it and we can produce a report that people can understand. So we worked together. I hope I learned some things from her to be able to communicate a little bit better. But yes, so I would say that when I needed to communicate at first, there was her. That was really, really helpful. And then later, when I was an independent contractor, yes, there was one of my clients. We spent, it depends on who, there are some people who get it really fast, who have intuition and they get it and it's no effort. And some other people, maybe because they are more skillful at other things and this is less their specialty. And so, yes, it takes longer. And also maybe because I'm not as skillful as I was not as skillful as I should at explaining. I don't know. But it was complicated.
And the skills is one thing that managers maybe lack in order to understand in detail what data science is, how to work with AI and algorithms. But the other thing that we see in research is that there seems to be a certain skepticism towards algorithms also. Could you reflect a little bit on that? Why is that? Is that a normal hesitance towards change? Is it maybe protection because managers are the ones making decisions based on their in-depth knowledge that others don't have, right? Is there a legitimate concern? So what is your kind of thinking around this algorithm skepticism?
I think that it depends on who. For example, I think that it's true that one of my clients with whom I had to spend a really long time explaining, and I remember one day I said, okay, I think that now you have to trust me. Either you trust me, either you don't trust me, but I don't think we can manage to, keep going like this because, and I think that it's true that there is this question of also this loss of control. Because there is this instrument that he doesn't master and that he has to trust. But, it's a little bit the idea that maybe you don't need to use this instrument and then you can use something else. So it's also a choice. And maybe you will never be able to get how everything is working. And maybe we are spending a really long time because I'm giving you the impression that you get how it's working, but maybe it's not possible to fully get how it's working. So yeah, but yes, there is this question. There is the question of accountability. So if you use a black box and then you have to be accountable for a black box, for him, I know it was a lot of his problem because these tools, he was my client and he was selling what I did to other clients. So it was a problem for him, this question of accountability and to be sure that, what he's going to sell is going to be good enough. I think that, yes, there is also this question of change. For example, I've noticed that sometimes the managers, they would ask the data scientists to develop an AI algorithm, but in an interface that is exactly the same interface as what they used to work with. So just as a concrete example, they would, for example, they want to be able to, manage the number of products that there are in the warehouse. But, there are a lot of different products, like thousands of products. And so what they used to do was to look at the historical Excel files to have an idea. And now they want a predictive algorithm. But, the data scientist would say, okay, what I could do is to create an algorithm that is going to tell you whether there will be an overall spike in orders, extra. But the manager will say, no, I want a predictive algorithm that is going to tell me the exact number of products. So like this, he or she can have the same Excel file and the same interface. But it's problematic because of the mathematical point of view, you will never have the algorithm is going to be really wrong because you don't have enough observations. But still, this manager would rather have this than something too different. So of course, there is this question of changing the practices. So yes, I think there are a lot of questions, and then maybe there is the question about the type of decision. I guess that if probably these algorithms are more useful if it's to help on very operational decisions, so, okay, maybe if I know that in 3 days there will be a huge spike huge spike in order of products, maybe, I can say to one truck and 2 more people to come and work. So it's very operational. Or maybe, my algorithm can be like inspecting my field and tell me, you need to water this part of the field or do something, Also, it's going to work well maybe with things that can be performative, unfortunately. But, for example, you are going to recommend products to a customer, and so then it's going to become performative. But I think that, of course, for more complicated decisions where you actually have a choice, a real choice, then it's going to be more complicated. It's what I would assume. Yeah.
And the field of digitalization, AI, is of course extremely broad. And I mean, the topics that we've talked about today already show that there are so many different things that could be and need to be explored in more detail. What are the things that you would like to do research on in the future? What are your concrete plans? What are the phenomena that you would like to do more research on?
Yeah, so of course there are so many things, and I guess it's the beauty of our job is that we have too many things to study. So this is great. But I would say that until now, what I have mainly done is focus on the work of a data scientist, even though we have not really talked about it, and focused on platform organizations. Now, I think that AI is actually being used, or AI, or at least I would say algorithms of data analysis with real big data, collected in real time. They're actually being used in more and more organizations. And so in the future, I really want to focus and investigate on how AI algorithms shape organizational decision making. And so in particular, in the public sector, in France at least, there are a lot of open data policies. With all these efforts of moving towards more sustainable world, these data are actually starting to be used. And this is really revolutionary in the public sector, to use this sort of sensors that can collect real-time data. So actually, I'm developing a project about it in the field of urban logistics, where these data can assist, the production of regulatory knowledge. So this is one field where I find it really fascinating to see how the public sector is modifying their routines to produce also this new type of knowledge. And then there is another field which I think we have heard a lot about, but I think is really interesting in any case. It's the field of health and medicine, because the doctors now are using more and more AI algorithms. And in particular to assist critical decisions. So of course, it's not the algorithm that is making the decision, but still, the algorithms are used to assist critical decisions, typically about whether I should turn off the machine or leave it on, because whether I think the person is going to recover or not. And so about this, yes, I'm also developing a project with a group of neurology, so this should be interesting. So this is in the future. We'll see what gets out of this. I don't know, but at least I'm interested with this project. I'm happy with this project.
We've spoken about the impact of AI and algorithms on managers and controllers and performance evaluation processes. But I was sort of wondering, how does AI shape academic life, or how will it change academic life? So do you use any tools yourself? Because, for example, when I open up my Outlook, it's now Microsoft Viva that tells me what items I should focus on, or people that I should reach out to because they haven't yet responded or I haven't responded. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I guess that this is organizational life in general, and even social life. The fact that we are always nudged, always sort of like, so this is like this, sort of behavior manipulation somehow of you have to do this or that or whatever. Yes, and I guess there is a lot of information load as well, which maybe for academics specifically is a little bit difficult because we need long period of time to focus. And when you always have something telling you, do this and that and this and don't forget that, of course, it's not really easy to focus really well. It's interesting because yesterday we were talking about this a professor of computer science at Stanford. I don't remember his name, but so he's a professor of computer science. And he said, oh yes, me, I don't have an email. If you want to contact me, you contact my secretary and this person will deal with it because, I need to focus to do some research.
How do you deal with that yourself? Because you also being trained as an engineer and a data scientist, what do you use any tools yourself when you go about your research or go about other parts of your academic life?
Yeah, I guess that, for example, the paper that we developed with Martin and Jan about QAnon, this one, indeed, I used a lot of Python to be able to scrape the data. In the end, we didn't decide to do any machine learning of, we could have done topic analysis or whatever, but it's not the way we proceeded. But indeed, the Python skills were really, really useful to get all the data we got for free, at least. So yes, sometimes I open Python and I do something. And maybe also with, I guess that, for example, the work with how AI algorithms may be used in medicine, a reason why they were interested to work with me is also because of my background in AI. Because, like this, I can sort of understand a little bit the algorithms they develop. Even though they have great data scientists who are much better than me, but it's more the fact that like this, I have a human science, but also like this understanding. So yes, it is useful sometimes.
The phenomena that you look at in your research, you said they relate to organizational life in general. And that on the one hand relates to what we do in research and the questions that we ask and the things that we look at. But it also relates to how we prepare our students for this transformed organizational life, right? What are your ideas, reflections here? How should we adjust our curricula to kind of account for these changes in organizations that are going on?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess there are several things. If we take a very, very, very applied point of view, of course, we already know that AI is modifying audit and how auditing is carried, in terms of the data use, in terms of the processes. And also, so this is on the very practical auditor job, but also more generally because, auditing is becoming ubiquitous and an increasing number of elements are being made auditable. Even though here, I need to stress that there is not really a direct, a correspondence between the digital elements and the physical persons. So of course, accountability is a bit dubious, but yeah. But anyway, so auditing is really deeply modified, and I also think that if we refer once again to the article of Power of 2022 in Organization Theory, he's also arguing that we need to extend the concept of the audit society to something else, to account for these transformations. So I guess that there is the practical aspect of audit that is being modified, but then there is also what we understand by audit and what it means. So all this. So I think that these are things that are important practically and conceptually to maybe like for students. Then I also think that, there are always more diversified numbers that are used for management control, for strategizing, and that are also really deeply modifying organizational functions. And so I think that here it is really probable that it could be of use to the accounting students and the future controllers to like have a good understanding and knowledge of these new type of data, of the transformations they went through, of what it means, because sometimes they are presented as neutral, but what is it? Is it neutral if it went through Facebook where there is an algorithm? So I think all these understanding should be given to our students. And then also maybe because we're in the era of surveillance capitalism, so probably we need ethics classes about this, because as students will participate in the production of quantification, I think they should be aware of these questions. Yeah, and finally, on a more theoretical point of view, maybe we can extend their knowledge about what it is to what is legitimate knowledge, how quantification extends. What does it mean? Why is quantified knowledge legitimate? Are all quantified knowledge the same? And so what does it hide and what does it show? And I guess all this.
And just to ask you a question and to go back to our title that we started this with, do you think that algorithm is a dancer?
Actually, it's fun, but in the article on QAnon, so there is an author, but I don't remember his name right now, who developed the idea of choreographic power. And this idea that AI is maybe producing some form of not necessarily only like capitalist power. I don't remember what Shoshana Zuboff said, but this choreographic power, where it's like choreographing our thoughts. And so yes, I think it is a very good metaphor.
So Elise, thank you so much for talking to us. It was great that we've learned a bit more about platform organizations. We've learned about AI. We've learned about how it changes accounting, controlling, and also how it changes academic life and organizational life in general. Again, great stuff that you're doing with regards to your research, and thank you for sharing some tips and hints with regards to what we should focus on with our students as well. So thank you very much. And to our audience, we wish you happy accounting.
And thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so happy accounting.
Happy accounting.